What's good, you guys? So in today's video, we will be answering some of the questions you guys had about Enneagram Type 8. Incognito1670 asks, I wonder if all of the ENFJ 8s are actually just mistyped ESFPs. I'm glad you asked. Well, I would say that it's possible and that it did happen. For sure, there are some ENFJ 8s that are actually just ESFPs. Now, when it comes to people who self-type themselves, it's, I would say it's more likely that you'll see an 8 core typing himself as a thinking type, especially when it comes to tests. They will receive the thinking type in the test, even if they are an ESFP. That's just my personal experience with it, and I have known many 8s, regardless of their type, regardless of the Socionics type, MBTI type, nearly always they self-typed as a thinking type. There are ENFJ 8s who are actually ESFPs, but they often can also be other types, like social 2, maybe even some social 9 who thinks they're just a big mama bear who wants to help everyone, or caretake everyone and stuff like that. So that does happen. Red Z83 asks, I think I've seen you on the stream, so it's nice to see you here. What are the differences and similarities between SP8 and SX8, SP8 and SO8, and SX8 and SO8? SX8 is much more relational, it's much more provocative, it wants to flaunt its values and its expressiveness. So in general, it's much more emotionally intense and emotionally charged type. More expressive, more in the center of things, dragging attention to itself. Very expansive individual. SPA, on the other hand, is very different. They're much more cold. They're much more impersonal. They don't draw as much attention to themselves. They're much more low key. So there's very big differences energetically, their demeanor and how they behave, They tend to be much more strategic and cunning in the way they do things. They operate within their, Naranjo described them as to be able to operate within laws, rules, and organizations and play around with those rules and bend them to their will. So this is a much more strategic and cunning individual. Now, similarities, if I was to think about the similarities, is that both of those types can, they're pure lust. They're not counter types. They can seem very much like pure representation of lust. So no fucks given. They both can give zero fucks and satisfy themselves in whatever way they want, especially when they're unhealthy. So very, just in general, outwardly antisocial. Going their own way can be seen in both of those subtypes. Now, SP8 and Social 8, differences are that the Social 8 is much more relational. Social 8 is focused on relationships, on their personal bonds, right? Their relationship with their friends, their family, their community, whatever those are, but they're much more interpersonal. They tend to be a bit more agreeable than the SP8. There's more of that giving attitude that you see with the SO8, almost saving the other, rescuing. That's often seen in the Social 8. Social 8 has a tendency to involve itself with people or whatever causes, and they might have almost this savior complex in a sense, right? Trying to save people, trying to impact them, but generally more oriented towards making social impact, with people, interacting with people, being very engaged in the social sphere. That's also much more Social 8. You combine this with more outgoing, more friendly, and more extroverted demeanor. The SP8 is much more cold. They tend to be a bit more cold. They tend to be a bit more introverted, not in the center of things as much. Not really, they don't have this savior shit. You see those mistypes happen often. For example, Daemon Targaryen, he was typed as a Social 8 in the beginning, and even I myself used to kind of think he must be a Social 8 because he had his little golden cloaks, right? He was the leader of golden cloaks, and he gave about his family, his brother. That's not really enough to type someone Social 8, right? So there's no real Social 8. He was rebellious, he was not really agreeable in any way, he actually just gave a f about satisfying himself. Same thing happens with people who self-type themselves as Social 8, especially the SLEs. They think they are a Social 8 because they're not dickheads. You see them. I've seen questionnaires of people like this, he is not a dickhead. He can be generous with people. So suddenly he types himself as a Social 8, despite really liking the core qualities of the type. So yes, SP8s can be generous, SP8s can be even ideologically oriented in some type of way, you know. They can be on organizations and they can have some leaning into it, but at the end of the day, that's not their whole personality. That's not the core of their personality. Sexual 8 is pure lust. There's no justification there. It's pure lust. It's uninhibited. So getting what they want, expressing themselves fully, being purely antisocial. And there's that more impulsivity, there's more social detachment, but they're also quite similar, you know, both extroverted, both very expansive, and they're both relational. What is intellectualism exactly? What traits constitute intellectualism, and at what degree the three subtypes have or can have them? So when we are talking about intellectualism, at least in the context of Enneagram, it's not action over intellect, it's intellect over action. It's reasoning over feeling and action. So types like this, you know, like a 5-core, like a 6-core, those types would be intellectual in nature and high tolerance towards abstraction. The level of intellectualism obviously will vary from person to person, but I guess you can draw certain patterns. Sexual 8 is described to be the least intellectual, and I would say from what I have seen, okay, the examples we have, yes, it seems like they're the most detached from intellect. Now, that doesn't mean that they cannot even be interested in things like psychology or learn things. They certainly can. There are sexual 8s who are interested in those things. But the difference is here is that intellect is not going to be what they will use in their really... It's not going to be the core component to how they navigate the situation or situations, right? So this is not that kind of an individual. It's even less so than some of the other subtypes like SP8 or even Social 8. There is even a bigger detachment from the intellectualism and more involvement into pure impulsive emotion. There is this impulsiveness of desires that they will act completely, you know, upon. They're not really involving intellect in the things that they're doing. Now with SP8, I would say intellect is used as a tool to satisfy themselves and get what they need, to play the system, to blend in within the system, to blend in within an organization, to use leverage, to use power, to get exactly what they want, to get the best benefits that they can get. You know, I mean, Naranjo used to say for years, he described the social 8 as the intellectual 8, while the SP8 was the action-oriented 8. Now he decided it's time to change, and he switched it. He changed the social 8 to action-oriented and the SP8 to intellect. What do we think of this? We can follow it blindly, but I don't suggest that. I would say let's look at real-life counterparts. Let's look at those examples in real life to dictate, maybe help us to understand what is the capacity for intellect. That's, in my opinion, that's the best way. You know, theory is theory, but you should apply it. So with the social 8, like with other social subtypes, there is more tendency to use the head. Let's look at a simple pattern. Let's find out every intellectual subtype within Naranjo's theory. Social 1 is the intellectual 1. Social 2, social 3, social 4. Now he named it as social 4. I don't think it's it's actually the intellectual 4. Social 4 would be the intellectual 4. Social 5 is the intellectual 5. Social 6, social 7. Yes, it's no surprise, I would say, that it also applies to the social 8, and we have real life examples that really do back this up. Winston Churchill, he was a writer and a historian, a skilled orator, even though he was coped the out about that for a long time. He was trying to defeat it, his ability to speak, his speeches, right? And he actually overcame that. He had a deep understanding of philosophy, literature, and art. You know, despite all of this intellectual leaning, he was, at the end of the day, very dismissive of other people's viewpoints and extremely stubborn. What about Che Guevara? Also another social 8, another prolific writer. Produced many essays, books, articles about his revolutionary ideas. He had a deep interest in the Marxist ideology, and he was learning it with passion. What about Theodore Roosevelt? Also a writer. In fact, he wrote over 35 books. He liked to read philosophy, political theory, and social science. We, of course, then even have a modern example, which you can Google, which you can have he has a YouTube channel, Mohammed Hijab. I have used him as an example a few times before, but it's a great example to really highlight what I'm talking about. Mohammed Hijab, right? Multiple degrees from the Oxford University, studied theology, right? very interested in philosophy, also a writer, has written books and articles, known for participating in debates about Islam, about philosophy, about different religions. Even in those cases like Mohammed Hijab, you still see a preference of action, I mean, this is the guy who, whenever he talks about people, he challenges them to a fight, he wants to have a fight with them, to calls them cowards, and how they don't have the balls to actually face a challenge. And he's very involved sensorically, very involved physically, and he actually uses physicality to intimidate people, to scare people. He becomes dismissive, he becomes very arrogant, he becomes aggressive, he becomes confrontational whenever he engages in those kind of more intellectual debates. So those are the limitations of the 8 core. It is, third logic or fourth logic type. So even though someone like Mohammed Hijab can navigate those certain areas, you can still see he's relying on his will. He's relying on, putting the opponent down, right? Twisting his words and kind of not being really logically consistent, logically genuine. Next question is, how chill can 3 subtypes be? Every subtype can be chill if they are healthy, and that is the key. Any unhealthy 8 will not be chill. I'm telling you right now, any unhealthy 8, social 8, SP8, whatever the 8, they will not be chill people for you to be around. And that's normal for every type. How strong can the defense of moral, political, and even religious doctrines be in the 3 subtypes? SX8 the least, and the SP8 probably is the second one, while the social 8 is the most involved in those things, in the moral and the political or even religious, defending their religious views. It can be pretty strong. I mean, Mohammed Hijab is literally, he is in defense of Islam. He's in defense of religion. So that's his whole point. His whole YouTube channel, everything about him is literally religion. And he's defending that. Forget the 3 subtypes, but in 8 overall, there can be a very strong tendency to defend what they believe is good or bad or moral or their political views or what they think is the truth. So 100% they can fight for that, and they can be very involved. Joshua Kakuza 5736 asks, I'm biased too. Welcome to the club. How would you, as an 8, help a 5 core grow? I know people aren't heavy on integration lines and such, but regardless, at the end of the point is technically that you should embody the positives of every type. For embodying, I would say this. My advice to you as a 5 core, obviously it depends, because everyone's different. You are different from the fucking other person. You might have different struggles. But if I was to just look at the Enneagram wise, for you to stay focused on the moment, live in the moment, and engage in the moment. Don't get carried away about what the can happen in the future, or staying detached and not engaging in the world. So if I was to try to help you, it would be try to stay engaged with people, with the world, with the external world. Don't get sucked into your own little bubble and just geek over it. No, you need to engage in the world, whatever it might be, however it might be. Even going for walks, engaging with people, that's good. Staying concrete, staying grounded, because you need more of that. And especially if you maybe have plans, or maybe you have a tendency to think about things but you don't act on it. You need to change that. You need to listen. Next time you have dreams, you have projects, you have things you want to work on, don't just think about it for a bit and then do it. I had someone come to me with an idea for YouTube. They came to me and they were like, I have this idea and but I don't want to do it because I need to be ready and I don't feel it's good enough. And it's like, by the time you have been thinking about it for 2 months, I could have already made a YouTube channel in that time and already gotten traction. You could have already done that. You could have had that. Dosdano asks, how do you get along with other 8 cores in real life? Is there often aggressive approach between you? I don't know a single 8 core in real life that I'm close to. I'm sure I've met 8 cores in my life, but I don't know any that I am close to. So I have no idea how to answer that question. But I know someone online. I know few SP8 and SX8. We get along very well. There's a certain understanding between each other. We can talk about things that one of us experiences. Maybe if I'm a bit older than them, so I can offer them things and give them maybe advice on how to deal with certain things that I already went through, because we are the same type. I went through the growth, so I can offer them some help. But there's no issues. Venjarot, I probably fucked your name up. I'm sorry, dude. 1221 asks, is SPA typically more cunning and restrained in their impulses compared to other subtypes? Since SPA is usually described as having this don't mess with me and I won't mess with you attitude to getting what they want, I think that they are less inclined to go out of their way to impose their will on others, just for the sake of it, as both as SX and SO8. I would say they are more cunning, they're more strategic, yes. I'm not sure if they're more restrained in their impulses. I don't necessarily think that. But it is true. I would say that the SPA has more of a vibe, don't mess with me and I won't f with you. That's more true. I think I know an SPA and much more low key, much more low key. That doesn't mean he won't impose himself on other people. He certainly will. It's not as likely as with some of the other subtypes, as you kind of pointed out very well. He tends to be more low key, kind of get what he wants, not drag as much attention. And I actually personally find him pretty chill. He's pretty chill to hang out with. Now, if he was not in a good mental state, maybe if he was not as healthy, I can assure you that it would not be as chill for anyone involved. And especially if you, more so, he doesn't go out of his way to f people up or impose his way, but if he perceives any attempt at anyone fucking with him in any sort of way, there will be bloodshed. Now, Celuida 1379 asks, SP8 is SLE. Don't you think a weird type who's FE plus mobilizing, that is a bold function, to B3E, so dry? I think, listen, don't pay attention to the whole idea of the bold function, like in Western, where it's like people justify the mobilizing, like it's some strong element. It's not strong, it's weak, and it sucks, okay? Meaning, the SLE doesn't know how to express his feelings. The SLE is very sensitive in this area, so any criticism will actually wound the SLE. SLE wants regulation on how to express himself appropriately. Sometimes he does it too much, sometimes he does it too little. He doesn't know how to handle emotions and how to express them appropriately towards the situation. So if anything, if he does express, it can often lead to negative expression or negative consequences because he might not be as wary of people's feelings, or it might say something that's very, a bit cutting. Unaware of the impact it might have. Just because it's FE+, that doesn't mean it's going to manifest the same way as if it would with the ESE. ESE is the blueprint of the FE+, because it's the base. It's FE base plus. That's why it's like this vibrant. With the SLE, at the end of the day, it's mobilizing element. We don't know how to use it without supervision of other people. You feel indecisive. You feel helpless without other people's input in this element. Rahat Kupeyev, how would you correlate Naranjo 8 to Ichazo points? Ichazo 8 is Naranjo 8 and Naranjo 8 is Ichazo 8. I also used to think that, it's very different because the way people were talking about it, I didn't read the sources. But once you read the sources, which divine forms and Enneagram of fixations, you'll see something about the Enneagram 8 that will make sense. People hyperfixate on the word moralist, and because they don't understand, how would that ever be applicable to the Naranjo 8? They don't understand. How would it be critical? How would the Naranjo 8 be critical and judgmental of other people? That doesn't make sense. Sean Strickland, by the way. In fact, if you look at Character and the Roses and even some other books like 27 Personalities in Search of the Being, you'll see some patterns that really overlap, literally like a copy-paste of the Ichazo 8, which is both of those types are oriented towards justice, which the Naranjo 8 is. It does focus on justice as long as people don't interfere with its power. So if you don't interfere with its power, it will protect you. But it does stand up for justice for itself and for other people, to the point where justice might even become an ideal that the 8 core cares about or the 8 core pursues. So that's not a problem. That's already very fitting. Second, it also views itself as just. The 8 views itself, the Naranjo 8 views itself as just, as honorable and fair, despite a very clear hypocrisy that, they're not the most just or honorable. They might give an impression of this, they might believe that because, hey, everyone is pretending to be nice, everyone is pretending to give a or pretending to be more friendly and more loving than they are, while I don't pretend, while I'm just me, I'm being real, I'm being, they're all fake, that's superficial, that's not true, I am being real. So I'm being honest, I'm the only honest one. Attitude towards criticism and criticality and critical observations, which the Naranjo 8 still has. It still has, and it is written in Character and the Roses, how the Naranjo 8 feels entitled to make those critical judgments and observations of other people, scornful observations, yet they are also entitled not to be criticized themselves. People should stop hyperfixating on one single dichotomy, which I see happening all the time. It's like they forget that the 8 is excessive. That the 8 is excessive type. It's literally the passion of excess, of indulging in everything that they do. Anything, ideas, obsessions, hobbies, whatever the fuck, pleasures, luxuries, whatever. It's like they forget that the excess is the passion, and they just think there's one dichotomy which makes the 8 a Puritan, while in reality there are two dichotomies, Puritan and Libertine, which by the way coexist with one another. AC4889 asks, thoughts on SEE SP8? Heard some consider it due to SP8's ability to be a conman, and how that could relate to FI creative in creating relationships and managing them. There is really nothing in the SP8 descriptions to indicate that they are good at relationships, creating relationships, and managing them. And besides, being a conman doesn't mean that you are FI creative. I mean, LIEs can be conman, ILEs can be conman. So it's not related to being FI creative, because a conman doesn't necessarily manipulate relationships, and that's important. That's not necessarily a conman. A conman can manipulate a logic. A conman can manipulate information and manipulate facts. SP8 is literally the most unemotional 8 core, the most impersonal 8 core, more strategic and more cunning, trying to rewrite different rules and procedures to gain leverage and to gain power, which the SP8 can do. They can blend in a system, they can manipulate the laws and the rules, create their own, and use that to get leverage. They use those systems, they use those positions to get leverage, to get power, to get what they want. This cannot be the SCE. Ramsey Leo 6525 asks, Enneagram 8 doesn't give a shit about social norms and socially approved status like Enneagram 3. Do you agree? I do agree, yes. They want to fight for what they want. That's it. Being independent and having autonomy. Yeah, following this logic, you'd consider Enneagram 8 to be a good team player. As an 8, I always thought I'm a decent team player, but recently realized the fact my stupid team is more often than not would fuck up and I'll lose. They can excel in a team, but this is tricky because we have examples of that. Roy Keane is a good example of a self-preservation 8 in a team. He was a captain, but he was known to be quite difficult. He was very expecting of people. He was very fucking ruthless. But he was also confrontational, even with the managers and coaches. And he got into some scuffles here and there. But he was also a very effective leader. He knew how to fight for his team. And he was there. He gave a fuck about his team members. It might not seem like it because he was kind of a asshole, but he gave a shit. And he would fight for them. He would fight for his club. And in his mind, it was that's his job. That is his job. That is his duty. That's what he does. Yeah, he fights for his club. Yeah, and he's gonna play hard. So he was amazing at that. But was he always easy to deal with? No. But he was goddamn effective. Cyanide Poisoning 6 asks, how would you describe what the neurotic pattern is like as an Enneagram 8? And have you experienced it? Can you break out of it? Of course I experienced it. I think it's sometimes weird to think about your own neurotic pattern. I think other people view it, see it much more clearly. But I've broke out of it. Yes. I did. I'm at this stage where I did. I'm much more healthy. I'm pretty healthy now. I'm pretty healthy in terms of like the 8 growth and shit. I've improved much, much more. But even now, listen, the neurotic pattern is not something that completely goes away. Yes, I'm healthy and I'm not really controlled by it, by my neurotic need, but I sometimes still get into situations where certain behaviors and tendencies will pop up. I try to be tolerant. I try to be open-minded, right? I try to be compassionate. I try to see people as equals, right? I do that and always give room for people and care about maybe my impact on people. I try that, but sometimes maybe there's some pushback. I'm in a situation where it's not the easiest to be that kind of person. So you will see attitude that might be aligned with the neurotic need. I can become imposing. I might, even though I give a fuck about freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of intellectual thought. At that moment, I don't want that shit. I don't want freedom of intellectual thought. I want to decapitate whoever is in front of me and whatever ideology or team that they're on. I want to decapitate that too. There's this almost hyper-imposing mentality that happens that doesn't really tolerate anything that is not aligned with what I want or my desires or my thoughts. But when I experienced true neurotic pattern in my life was after loss of my father. I was not handling it the way I was supposed to be, which is, I think, cry it out. I think accept it and just try to process it. I did not process shit. In fact, everyone used to tell me, like, wow, you handled the death so well, wow. I didn't handle it well, I just didn't handle it at all. I just rejected the notion. I was like, he's gone now, so what the can I do? I mean, Jesus Christ, you know, what can I do? I cannot bring him back. What can I do? I can only go forward. I had dreams. That's the up thing. That's when you know you're up. I had dreams that were about my father. Yet when I was awake, I felt like there's nothing wrong with me. You feel like, you know, you're not coping, but clearly your subconscious is like you're dreaming about. You are dreaming about this shit. So that's when I knew, like, okay, this is some PTSD action. That shit didn't stop me, and I can tell you the neurotic response was very obvious. And I would say like this, and I talked about on stream. Emotional deadness. That was one of the things that manifested as. As a consequence of this emotional deadness, there was a need for stimulation, and there was almost this weird lack of any like human emotion. It was weird experience. It was like no fear. There's no fears. There's nothing. You feel there's nothing that moves you anymore. You can see shit that other people can't see and process, and to you it's nothing. It's complete. It's this indifference. It's indifference to pain. It's indifference to suffering that you create. It's indifference to chaos that you make. You have no compassion and you have no empathy. You become intolerant. You become forceful with people, your way or the highway. Any defiance or any way of kind of trying to go against me would be punished. You know, it would be punished really quickly. And I wouldn't keep people like that. This emotional deadness made you feel like you had this thirst for intensity, which I would really consider it almost like existential boredom. I just felt crippled in my boredom. I just felt dead. I felt like I'm always bored. And the only way I was not bored is if I was doing stimulating things, being very active or even causing chaos, even making people angry, creating conflicts, whatever it was. I wanted to do that because that's the only way I felt like I was. It made me feel alive. It made me feel like I'm not bored anymore. Humps asks, I have a problem typing social 8 and sexual 3 guys in real life. Can you tell the difference? With girls, it's no problem, just guys. Sexual 3 is a type that is driven by vanity. So what you can experience, what you can see is they're showing you an image of perfection. They're showing you an image. It's good image. Very driven, very ambitious. They want to do very well. They want to be pragmatic. They want to take, control of things. They want to do it well. And they tend to be very controlled in their presentation. They know exactly what they show you. So the presentation is manufactured. In general, the sexual 3 is a conforming type, which is not the 8. So they will conform to social ideals, to social norms, to what it means to be beautiful, to what it means to be a masculine man or a successful man, and they are conforming to ideals. They don't want to be rejected by society. They want society's approval. The social 8 is different. Despite being the social antisocial, like all 8s, they're rebellious. And if anything, they will be rebellious against the social norms given by our society that are maybe the society is pushing upon us. The social 8 is more likely to speak up against those social norms that are restrictive or oppressive or anything like that. And they're not controlled in their behavior. You might see them as impulsive. They need to feel stimulated to keep on going, to indulge more in life, right? In the intensity of life. So that's what happens with the social 8. They're very different. Anyway, guys, this video is way too long anyways. So if you have more questions, ask them down below. And obviously this series will continue. We're gonna do 1 or 9 next or whatever maybe I might do a poll if you guys want like 4, 5, 6, whatever is popular, we will do. Maybe 6. Maybe we'll do 6 next time. Thanks for the questions. It was very interesting answering them. I'm out. I'm bouncing. Ciao.